And today we have a new episode of Great Books for Men and Forons too. And the play or book of plays we're focusing on today is Madame de Sade by Yukio Mishima. And Mishima was primarily known as a novelist, but he wrote two significant plays. And those are Madame de Sade and My Friend Hitler, about the long suffering wife of the Marquis de Sade, who was loyal to him throughout the period of his incarceration. And it's been staged twice, once by Michael Grandage in the early 2000s, and previously by Ingmar Bergman in the early 90s. And it's a very interesting subject if we look at Sade and how, what role he plays in today's society. And then we're going to look at Mishima and his interest in Sade or Sade or what have you. Sade, uh, Marquis de Sade is, of course, a millennial patron saint. Millennials are, in my opinion, not more vulgar than any prior generation, but their vulgarity is tempered with a particular deviance made available to the masses only by the promulgation, certainly by the introduction and promulgation of antibiotics. But partially, it's interesting to observe their adoption of so many of the practices that Sade kind of pioneered before the improvements in Western medicine, and at the same time note their interest in pain and masochism and things of that nature, which, if history is any indication, we see that presaging a overall era of suffering and pain. So just as the Marquis de Sade arranged suffering and pain prior to the French Revolution, we see people arranging and playing with suffering and pain in today's society because their lives are devoid of suffering and pain. So I'm going to read or from this book as well, but I'm going to talk about Mishima's primary interest in Sade as a character or as an individual, as a historical character of note. And I'm also going to talk about the plays that were staged from this drama that he created, and the interest in the female character of Madame de Sade herself. So, to begin with, we'll talk about the first play, or the second play, which was staged by Michael Grandage in 2009. It starred Judi Dench and that one woman who was in the Bond films. And quite a few of Mishima's books have been dramatized, most notably The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, for my audience anyway, was filmed, made into a movie in the 70s by Robert Relia, I believe. And it starred Chris Christopherson and some actress whose name is not germane to this conversation. So, obviously, the staging in 2009 of this version of Madame de Sade was not well received. And even though it starred Judi Dench and had a very fine cast and production, it's very interesting to note that the background of the individuals who are willing to stage this play, Grandage comes from a deep theatrical background. You can kind of see what its politics were like in the early and mid 2000s by watching a TV show like Slings and Arrows, which is a Canadian, it's not a sitcom, but it is a film event or a TV series that depicts the situation or the milieu from which this play would emerge on the, they call it the boards walking the boards of the theater or something like that. And the play is called a discussion drama, and it's fallen out of favor because everyone in the Western world has become too feminine and narcissistic to follow a cast of characters in which they're not particularly invested. There's a leftist writer we don't hear much about anymore named Christopher Lasch who predicted this in his works, specifically The Culture of Narcissism. And the decline of the attention span overall has made it more difficult for people to conceal their self-centeredness, which in itself is a byproduct of their consumerism. People are born to be consumers, not workers, not anything else. They're born to consume. That is their primary purpose, is to fuel the machine by their consumption, which, is a great job if you think about it. It sure beats working to fuel the machine. So most people work fake jobs to get paid with fake money to consume real products because we have such a surfeit of garbage. So it's very jarring for people in the Western world to be exposed to plays and films containing ideas such as satisfactions from suffering and self-sacrifice, and the idea of women deriving pleasure from the same. So I'm sure in many ways, Mishima-san based some aspects of the character on his own wife, who remained intentionally oblivious to many of the things, or what he called his pranks. But it's very interesting that most drama and theater kids today don't care about the texts or plays or portrayals of characters. It's all about the instant gratification of their crippling narcissism. It's almost been it's closer to 20 years from 2009 than it's not. And one can't envision a future staging of this play unless one stages it himself, namely me. So, and were one to stage it, namely me, one would find it very difficult to actually have or find a cast of worthy of portraying these characters or capable of portraying these characters more accurately. And such a realization would set the stage, in fact, so to speak, for the use of embodied AI actors in such roles, which I think is going to happen anyway in the near future as humans lose their capacity for such things. So, talking about the structure of this film overall, we talk about the way it's created. One of the most egregious aspects of liberalism and its corrosive influence on culture and its insistence that every nation and culture and people and every figure, past, present, and future, in real life and fiction, share their perspectives on everything. So they are very unhappy with this play. It received very poor reviews. It was not well received at all. Obviously they're going to congratulate Grandage, a gay man, for staging the play, but the play itself gets no appreciation whatsoever. Madame de Sade can be described as long suffering, but there's a certain amount of what I would call exuberance in her quiet rebuttals to the remonstrances of her mother or mother-in-law and the other figures in the play, which we'll go into. The play itself is called a discussion drama, and it's fallen out of favor because, again, as I said, did I say that already? That's unfortunate. And the structure of the discussion drama is significant because I actually started working on one, perhaps as an unconscious homage, a few years ago, and the main character was based on Pastor Lindstedt. So it would have been a good a good. It was actually more than 10 years ago. I started on Carnival of Pain, and the only reason I bring or interject my personal works into this is, first of all, it was never published, and second of all, it gives me some perspective into the idea of the discussion drama of bringing characters together and just making them talk to one another. And we'll read some of Mishima's thoughts on this in the afterwards as well. So I know feminists in the 70s, mostly Jewish feminists, were really overwhelmed with the ordeal of civility, specifically, as Cudahy put it. And they would often contend that Western civilization was created by the suffering of women and must therefore be eliminated. Over time, those same women, those same feminists have developed a more neoliberal perspective. But most women in society are averse to the conditions in which indoor plumbing was created. They enjoy the comforts and trappings of our civilization today, but are very much interested in developing a lower standard of living for their daughters. Because, at the crux of the matter, the bottom line is that everyone knows, unconsciously or otherwise, either women are suffering or everyone else in society is suffering. And contrary to what most men think in today's society, women don't represent a preponderance of the population, nor does their opinion matter. Currently, they're being used as the semblance of biopower sustaining the existing structure of authority, or we might say the status quo. But in fact, the Comtean political cult of positivism is at its end, having been used as a tool by the elites just as Marxism before it. So that's all behind us now for the most part, and we can reconsider this play, which I think will be reconsidered quite a bit in the future of mankind, especially with the adoption of embodied AI. And I think a lot of Mishima's works will come back as AI learns to appreciate it. Right now, it's very jarring, as I said, for people to appreciate this work, but I think it's a very good work. It's not an aggressive work by any means. Mishima was very much not an aggressive writer. He was quite subtle with his power. He intended to depict Sade through women's eyes. So it was his intention to create this character who steadfastly stood by her man until the end of his struggles and then immediately left him and said she never wanted to see him again. So Mishima, as I said, is primarily interested in Sade himself. Not He wants to see Sade through other people's eyes. As a healthy narcissist myself, I can say that narcissism becomes debilitating when it inhibits you from accomplishment. And so Mishima's interest again is to view Sade from every possible perspective, shoot him from every possible angle. And one of those angles is from his wife's perspective. That's why he creates the character of his wife amongst others. Now, I find the character of his wife more interesting because my interest overall in female fictional characters and their development. Mishima would probably find it tedious because the woman acts as women do. She's loyal to him through his struggles when he's basically a struggling rock star, but then he changes. He goes through all these difficulties that she stands by him, but it changes him. He becomes less savage and cruel. He becomes fatter, more the savagery of his aggression and his charm vanishes. So he is left with the same deviance, but the charm is gone, so to speak, and she loses interest and no longer wants to have anything to do with him. And Mishima would say par for the course. Now, dealing with the character of women in general, it's very hard to create female characters and do them well, and it's primarily been a male, male, only male authors can properly portray female characters. You have Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, you have Dreiser's Antithesis, Antithesis, Carolyn Meber, you have Madame Bovary, you have so many rich depictions of females by male novelists that one could say Austen and the Bronte sisters are exceptions to the rule that women cannot create good characters or anything else for that matter. So I would go so far as to question the authorship of Austen and the Bronte sisters books. So again, we're going to read from this book, and I'm going to begin by reading from the foreword, and I may do this or the afterword or the postface. Reading the life of the Marquis de Sade, I was most intrigued as a writer by the riddle of why the Marquise de Sade, after having such absolute fidelity to her husband during his long years in prison, should have left him the moment that he was at last free. This riddle served as the point of departure for my play, which is an attempt to provide a logical solution. The play might be described as Sade seen through women's eyes. I was therefore obliged to place Madame de Sade at the center and consolidate the theme by assigning all the other parts to women. Madame de Sade stands for wifely devotion. Her mother, Madame de Montreuil, for law and society and morality. Madame de Simeon for religion. Madame de Saint-Front for carnal desires. Anne, the younger sister of Madame de Sade, for feminine guilelessness and lack of principles, and the servant Charlotte for the common people. I had to involve these characters with Madame de Sade and make them revolve around her with something like the motions of the planets. I felt obliged to dispense entirely with the usual trivial stage effects and to control the action exclusively by the dialogue. Collisions of ideas had to create the shape of the drama, and sentiments had to be paraded throughout in garb of reason. I thought that the necessary visual appeal would probably be provided by the beautiful Rococo costumes. Everything had to form a precise mathematical system around Madame de Sade. Sade, Sade, Sade. I have to do this again. I have to skip. In any case, I'm going to read some extracts from the play. And I highly recommend viewing both the 2009 play starring Judi Dench and the 1991 or 1992 adaptation by Ingmar Bergman. And I don't know if the Bergman one is in English, but there is one with subtitles on YouTube. How kind of you to say so, Madame de Sibon. It's so strange when I think of it now, but when my daughter Renee married Alphonse, I was truly delighted with his character. I detected a streak of frivolity, it is true. But after all, he is a charming, amusing man, and he was obviously fond of my daughter, Saint-Fond. And there was also the happy circumstance that this alliance made you relatives of the royal family, Montreuil. That is quite true, but at the beginning my son-in-law was most affectionate. While he and Renee were on their honeymoon at École Manor, Alphonse put on plays he had written, and even I took part in them. Those days of our play acting were quite enchanting. Simeon. I'm sure they were. Alphonse, even as a boy, was the sweetest, most lovable child. I remember once we were playing in the rose garden when a thorn stuck in my fingers. I burst into tears, but Alphonse carefully pulled out the thorn and even sucked the wound. Saint-Fond. He had already acquired a taste for blood. Simeon, angrily. You make Alphonse sound like some kind of vampire. Saint-Fond. I'm sure that vampires are sweet and lovable too. Montroy. Please don't lose your tempers. Nothing we can say can remedy Alphonse's character now. But as I was about to mention, even while the newlyweds were happily acting in Alphonse's plays, he made frequent trips to Paris, on business, we were told. But, as we later learned, how shall I say it, in the company of women of a certain profession. Saint-Fond. Say whore, if that's what you mean. Montroy. How daring of you to use the word. At any rate, Alphonse was indulging in licentious pleasures with women of that description. Moving on. Montroy. Speak up. In this household no longer contains any secrets from these ladies. Besides, I haven't strength to get up and listen to confidences. Charlotte. Yes, madame. Montroy. Speak up, then. Madame de Sade has just arrived. Montroy. Madame de Sade. Evident surprise. The two guests exchange glances. What brings her here from La Costa? I wonder. Without a word of advance notice. Very well. Show her in, please. Charlotte. Yes, madame. Leaves. Madame de Sade enters. Montroy. Renee! Renee. Mother! They embrace. Montroy. I'm glad you've come here, Renee. I've missed you terribly. Renee. I've been desperate to see you. I couldn't think of anything else. When finally I couldn't stand it any longer, I packed my things and came. Every day at Lacoste it kept raining. Whenever I set foot outside the chateau, I was greeted by the stares of the villagers and their whispers, and when I went back to the chateau, I was alone all the time. At night, the torchlight flickered over the great walls, and bats flew back and forth screeching. I've come to Paris because I longed so keenly for even one glimpse of you, mother, and because I wanted a heart-to-heart talk with you, however brief. My carriage raced all the way. Montroy. I understand. Of course, I understand, Renee. It was good of you to come. You weren't the only one who was alone. I have been here all by myself, worrying over my poor daughter, until I almost went out of my mind. Oh, I should have introduced you. You haven't met Madame de Saint-Fond, have you? This is my daughter, Madame de Sade. How do you do, Renee? To Simeon. Dear Madame Simeon, it's been ages, hasn't it? Simeon. What an ordeal you have been through. Montroy. These ladies have agreed to help us. Two such friends on our side gives us the strength of a multitude. Renee, tell them how grateful you are. Renee, I deeply appreciate what you are doing for us. I have no choice now but to rely on you. Six years later, September 1778. Renee enters from stage left, Anne from stage right at the same time. Renee, Anne, Renee, I have good news for you. Renee, what is it, Anne? What has suddenly come over you? Anne holds a rolled up letter over her head. I'll give it to you if you want it badly enough. Renee, stop your clowning, Anne. Anne, look, here it is. Renee, you're exasperating. The two women in their elaborate robes chase each other around the room until Renee at last snatches away the letter. What is it? What did it say? Renee composes herself and reads aloud. Decision of the High Court. Whereas a document sealed in gold was issued by the authority of His Majesty in May of this year, asking for the retrial of Alphonse Francois, Marquis de Sade, hitherto incarcerated at the fortress of Visson, and this court having approved the decision of 1772 was set aside and a new trial ordered, as a result of which the following decision has been handed down with respect to the said Marquis. The defendant Marquis de Sade was reprimanded for the crimes of sodomy and corruption of the morals, and is fined 50 louis d'or, and he is here moreover forbidden to reside in Marseille for 3 years hence. Finally, on payment of this fine, his name is expunged from the criminal record. Oh, Anne, for a minute she is overcome by her relief. Anne, it's good news, isn't it, Renee? Like a dream. Anne, no, it's more like waking up from a nightmare. Renee, this means Alphonse is free, and so am I. After 6 years. You know, Anne, you remember, Anne, that autumn day 6 years ago when in this very room we all racked our brains to think of some way of saving Alphonse. You had just returned from Italy, where you had been consoling Alphonse after that terrible incident in Marseille. Anne, consoling Alphonse? Isn't it about time we gave up such circumlocutions? It happened so long ago. Renee, yes, so long ago. During the 6 years of my determination to obtain Alphonse's freedom has been the warp has been the warp of a fabric I have woven into many different patterns with the tangled threads of the woof. For 6 years I have been pounding on a door that refused to open. My nails were ripped away, my fists were covered in blood, but still I couldn't open the door. You did everything humanly possible, says Anne. Renee, I could do nothing with my strength. Mother's strength shut the door between Alphonse and myself, and when I least expected it, Mother's strength has now opened the door. And you do understand. Renee, that's why I'm staying with Mother this time in Paris. As long as we're still enemies, I always stayed in a hotel. And now perfect harmony reigns between Mother and her daughters. Renee, you have grown up, and I have grown old. And no, Renee, your face is just now, when it was shining with joy over the good news, looked younger and prettier than 6 years ago. So this is a very readable play, and this is why it's published as a book as well as a play. As the dialogue is very easy to follow, the book is very easy to follow. I highly recommend that you avail yourself of a copy. You should be able to pick it up of this translation of the play. This particular one is by Donald Keene, who is one of Mishima's biographers. You can pick it up for should be under $5. I certainly wouldn't spend over 10 on it. You'd be able to find it somewhere for that price. I highly recommend that you read the book in its entirety in the near future and subscribe to this channel immediately, if not sooner.